This is everything that I read this week. We're gonna talk about Paradise Lost because I just started book 2 this week. I already feel like my reading experience with book 2 is already a little bit easier than my reading experience with book 1. I also read the newsletter that Gutenberg Bible came out with on her Substack, where she kind of gives you an intro of book 2, gives you some things to think about, and she also ends it with some follow-up questions to kind of think about after you finish reading book 2. Another reading catch-up that happened this week is Remarkably Bright Creatures. I finally caught up to the point which my buddy and I have stopped reading at, and it got to a point where I'm starting to see some of the dots in this mystery start to connect. I feel like we're getting so much information and yet I still don't know what's going on. I feel like for me personally, this is a very slow read. I do take a lot of my time reading this book, but I'm enjoying it. After seeing so much about it, I finally decided to subscribe to the Paris Review. This is a collection of interviews, of prose, of poetry, of short stories, and even of like artworks. And so far, I've really enjoyed everything that I have read. I read a short story that was talking about a junior realtor. I read some journal excerpts from Eve Babbitt's. And just this morning, I was looking at this collection of artworks by Michael Maguro, who drew these like doodles of her husband. I feel like if you are a literary baby or an art baby in any single way, you might also enjoy subscribing to the Paris Review. So I picked up this magazine a couple of weeks ago. It's from National Geographic, but it's Secrets of the Supernatural. So it's an entire magazine dedicated to all things supernatural, all things esoteric, and it's actually quite fascinating. This chapter covered like magic. The second one covered mediums, like their rise into popularity, where it kind of stemmed from historically. It also covered ghost hunting, and it talked about the history of ghost hunting and where it began and how it wound up in mainstream media. And I'm actually really enjoying reading this magazine very slowly. I wanted to really lighten my reading pile a little bit, so I finally started Devil in Disguise by Lisa Kleypas. I wanted to read a romance, and this was the romance that was on my TBR list. I feel like Lisa Kleypas for me is a bit of a 50-50 author. Some of her works I love, some I haven't really enjoyed, but I do feel like I'm curious about Devil in Disguise. I'm really intrigued by the premise so far. Because I have been on such an Anne Carson kick, I actually picked up Glass Irony and God. So this is Anne Carson's collection of poetry. So I really wanted to see how she tackles this medium of writing. I really love the way Anne Carson writes, so I couldn't resist but pick up Glass Irony and God. So I started reading this, very excited to continue it. And finally, I finished listening to a book on audiobook. I do have a physical copy of this book, but I've mostly been listening to it on audiobook. This is called When God Was a Woman. This is a book that talks about ancient goddesses and ancient societies, and it also talks about how a lot of ancient societies were matriarchal or matrilineal. And it talks about how through the series of events that happened over time and the different societal events that was happening from the ancient period that solely led to the stripping of women's rights. It was actually quite fascinating, and I really enjoyed this book as an overall. I think if you're a fan of mythology and of ancient history, I think you're going to really enjoy this one as well.